Siap, Salpak, Kaya, Siap. Hear our cry tonight, Siap. We say thank you for watching over us. Beautiful people we are not, a proud people we are, Siap. We move forward, Siap. Hopefully hand in hand with our young ones, Siap. So that they may know the truth of our history, who we are. Open the way for this knowledge to reach our tribal schools in their studies. It's the right thing to do. Yeah. We thank you for this day we're blessed with. A good day, yeah. It's a good day to say thank you. Yeah. It's good answers, yeah. For my people to join us in this discussion, yeah. Bringing us forward as we learn from our old ones, yeah. Thank you for bringing the young people forward. Bless them, open the way for them with their mind, strong minds, yeah. But they don't forget this day, yeah. Holy shit, yeah. Steilacoom, holy shit. Thank you.
Thank you, Hoagie. And welcome, everyone. We are delighted to have you here again for the third in a series of new conversations among diverse communities impacted by the Puget Sound Treaty War and its aftermath. Fort Nisqually was established as a Hudson's Bay Company trading post in 1833 and was reconstructed a century later on the traditional lands of the Coast Salish peoples. As Netsi had stated in our last panel, this territory wasn't unclaimed. Tribal people were here, are still here. Tonight we have a lot to cover, so we're going to just get right to it. It's again my great pleasure to introduce our panelists and moderator. Brandon Raymond, Tribal Historic Preservation Officer and Assistant Director for the Puyallup Tribe. Brandon is an enrolled member of the Puyallup Tribe and the great-great-great-great-grandson of Hynuk, a treaty signer and Treaty Wars warrior for the Puyallup. He has been working for the Puyallup Tribe since 2008. Charlene Chris, Executive Director of the Squaxin Tribe Museum Library Research Center. Charlene's late father was dual enrolled Squaxin and Puyallup tribes of Medicine Creek Nation. From her late mother ancestry, she is a descendant of the Colville Confederated Tribes, Nez Perce and Yakima. She has worked for the Squaxin tribe for 29 years and has been an elected tribal official for over 20 years. And we are pleased to welcome Charlene as a first-time participant in tonight's dialogue. Danny Marshall, Tribal Chairman, Steilacoom Tribe. Danny is an elder and the current elected chairperson for the Steilacoom Indian Tribe. He has been documenting the history and telling the story of his people since the 1970s. As a part of the Steilacoom Tribal Council, he continues on a path and family legacy of leaders dating to the 19th century. Danny has provided guidance to the Steilacoom Tribal Cultural Center and Museum during its inception and since it opened in 1989. Jerry Eckram, historian and author, Fort Nisqually Living History Museum. Jerry is a lifelong resident of Tacoma and has been involved with Fort Nisqually for over 30 years. He is the author of Remembered Drums, The History of the Puget Sound Treaty War. Netsi Bullchild, Director of the Nisqually Tribal Archives and Nisqually Tribal Historic Preservation Office. Netsi is an enrolled member and elder of the Nisqually Indian Tribe. On her mother's side, Netsi is descended from Nisqually, Cowlitz, and Hawaiian ancestors. On her father's side, she is descended from Puyallup and Scottish ancestors. including John McLeod, a Hudson's Bay Company employee at Fort Nisqually. She has worked for the Nisqually Indian tribe for over 30 years. Warren King George, historian, Muckleshoot Indian tribe. Warren is an enrolled member of the Muckleshoot Indian tribe through his father's bloodline and a descendant of the Upper Skagit tribe through his late mother's bloodline. He has worked for the Muckleshoot Preservation Program since 2000. Our moderator tonight is Jennifer Ott, Assistant Director at historylink.org. Jennifer is an environmental historian and has been leading HistoryLink's efforts to increase and improve tribal history on the site, primarily through telling the stories of Washington watersheds. And introducing tonight's program are Muckleshoot historians and warrior descendants, Gilbert King George, Justice Bill, Mary Ross, Tyson Simmons, and Wayne Buchanan. Thank you all for being here. We greatly look forward for your introduction and for providing invaluable context for tonight's topic. With that, I'm going to pass it along to Jennifer and we'll get started.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. It's such a pleasure to be doing this panel again. It's the third in our series. And so I wanted to just give a little note that tonight's panel discussion is about the treaty war itself and the immediate causes that led to the outbreak of the war, who was involved and why, and the immediate impacts on tribal communities. Stories from the war have been covered elsewhere, but seldom from the perspective of Native people involved and their descendants. We hope tonight to set the record straight by hearing from these tribal members about the knowledge and stories that have been passed down through the generations. But first, Gilbert King George, Justice Bill, Mary Ross, Tyson Simmons, and Wayne Buchanan will share a short presentation. They've titled The 7 Myths About Our First Treaty War, and I'm looking forward to hearing this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Haslachel, everyone. My name is Justice Bill, and I'll give a more thorough introduction in a couple of minutes. But I just wanted to say on behalf of my family of scholars, we're very thankful to the Fort Nisqually Living History Museum for the invitation to share some of our stories tonight. We want to remind everyone that just because the knowledge that we're sharing was not recorded according to Western standards, that it's not invalidated. And we feel that it's important to share this history, but we're also guarded with how it came to us. Additionally, the footage that you'll see in some of the slides is filmed and recorded on location. So you'll get to see the landscape where some of the events in the war actually took place. And I will pass it on to Hoagie for his introduction.
Steilacoom, my warrior ancestors came from the local Sioux, Squaxin, and white Quilish. I am great grandson of Kawasaida, who loaded rifles for his relative, Chief Leshai. My son Warren and I are nephews too, warriors. Kabayak and Bowich, Puyallup, Kishunton, Bisadal, Kitsap, Yukshinot, known to whites at Old Nelson, Leplupton, Coquilton, Kainuk, Kawapati. I am a veteran of our second treaty war, the Salmon War, which we also won.
Tyson, you're on.
Hello, thank you guys for allowing us sharing this night. Yeah, my name is Tyson Simmons. I'm a Muckleshoot tribal member, and I come from Sioux and the Laco villages, and direct descendants from Old Sam, Squaxin, and a lot of, because I come from 2 different families on Muckleshoot, from my mom and my dad. So I'm very glad to be here with you guys. And yeah, I'm just happy to be here and share tonight with you guys. Thank you.
Mary, you're on. Unmute.
Mary Ross Seedsat till all Chud Buckleshoot. My name is Mary Ross. I come from the Seuss Creek, Boise Creek. And my direct descendants are Kawasaida and Hoptowit. Thanks for allowing me to be here with you.
Slache, Wayne Buchanan, Teetsta, Buddha Chudda T, Pete Buchanan, Yachsi, Sherry Buchanan, Muckleshoot, Slabs Chud, Talawches, Chwalat Sapch. Hello, everybody. Good day. My name is Wayne Buchanan. My dad is Pete Buchanan, and my mother is Sherry Buchanan. I'm an enrolled member of the Muckleshoot tribe, and my bloodline comes from the Boise Creek. I'm also specifically in Boise Creek, but I'm heavily Upper Puyallup, and I'm a Nooksack descendant. And I appreciate everybody showing up and being here, and I want to thank you all for having us.
Aslachel, Justice Bill Teetsta, Buckleshoot Hopshed. I come from a lot of villages, but my one that's most connected to the war is Quiet. And we'll speak more to that later in the presentation, but I'm a direct descendant of Skinawa, and I also am related through marriage to Kanasket and Kamayakin and a host of great warriors. And I also have the pleasure tonight to just to quickly introduce some of our some of the panelists who also come from this warrior bloodline. Brandon Raymond is a direct descendant of Hynek, and he also comes from Colquilton, Tuwapati, Wahilu, Peter Martin, and Charlie Martin, who are all his uncles. And we're also joined by Netzi Bullchild. She comes from 2 villages paramount to the war. Sorry for the pronunciation, but I think it's Yichwaltz, that's a village near Muck Creek, and then also the Michelle village. And her warrior ancestry comes from Wahilu, Peter Martin, and Charlie Martin. So the first myth that we're going to be discussing is this notion that Leschi recruited many tribes to join the war effort. As a matter of fact, Leschi may have visited other tribes and villages, but the ones who answered their call were all extended family. Our warrior family trees link the Nisqually, Puyallup, Muckleshoot, Upper Snoqualmie, Swampum, and Wenatchee relatives. And we never would have been successful in our effort without the legendary warriors and the strategists of the Wiyawak dynasty, which includes Ojai, Kamayakin, and Qualchan. They were joined by the Puyallup family from Selah, and if you circle back along the Natchez River over the Cascades, the circle closes at Nisqually. Our warriors were willing to die for each other because they were all father and son and uncle and cousin and in-law to one another. Peter Colquilton, myth number 2, sorry, is that we didn't understand the terms of the treaty. And I feel like this is a myth that's often propagated concerning treaty signing in general in the United States. However, Peter Colquilton from Puyallup actually could speak English. And old Steilacoom, who is uncle of Rosalie Bastian, was a translator. But Governor Isaac Stevens refused offers to translate English to Lushootseed. However, Leschi, even without a translation, understood very well what was proposed and that it would result in the ethnic cleansing of our people. I'll pass it to Tyson here.
Thank you. After the treaty gathering at Medicine Creek, our people gathered at North Puyallup. The full extent of the betrayal was understood, and we determined and was understood, and we determined to kill all the white people. Leshai alone urged the crowd to fight only if the soldiers came to drive them from their homes, but to spare their white friends with whom they lived in peace. Leshai had averted a massacre. Without Leshai's help intervention, Stevens would have been killed. Stevens owed his life to Leshai. He repaid Leshai by taking this good man's life. Leshai, Qualmuth, Ahai, Qualchin, and Mowich were murdered, but they are matriarchs to our people. Heroes among heroes, they sacrificed their lives for us. Wayne.
Number 3, the Indians started the war. Next slide, please. So some of the most courageous warriors who have ever lived fought and died for us to get this land back. I think that's evident as a fact, as many of our old ones were murdered even after the war. They fought because the lie paper called Medicine Creek Treaty and the lie paper called Point Elliott Treaty left our Muckleshoot people without any land, homeless in the land that the Creator made for us. Next slide. For example, 2 sections of land for 1,701 Indians, or 7 Indians, for 2 settler couples. Whites had already been claiming 640 acres of our land per couple before the treaties even cleared the title, even before they were ratified. The original 1,280 acre treaty reservation averaged less than 3/4 of an acre for each one of us. According to Dr. Barbara Lane's calculations, 3/4 of an acre of rocky soil never would have even sustained a decent kitchen garden. So the 1,280 acre area that just 2 settler couples could enjoy was the same where Stevens planned to herd 1,707 Indians. Stevens and Leshai both fully understood the math. Our chiefs knew that we would all have starved to death. Next slide. This is a letter from McAllister to Mason. James McAllister had been squatting for over 10 years on Nisqually land. He wrote to a letter to the superintendent of Indian Affairs for Washington Territory claiming, for the most reliable Indians that we have in this country, we have information and are satisfied that Leshai, a sub-chief and half Klickitat, is and has been doing all that he could possibly do to unite the Indians of this country to raise against the whites in a hostile manner, and has had some join in with him already. Sir, I'm of the opinion that he should be attended to as soon as convenient for fear that he might do something bad. Let his arrangements be stopped at once. Your attention to the above will be exceedingly appreciated by the people of Nisqually Bottoms. Next slide. And in response, Governor Mason gave the militia, Eaton's Rangers, a license to kill. Acting Governor Mason responded by authorizing a militia by stating, should you meet any unusual or suspicious assemblage of Indians, you will disarm them, and should they resist, disperse them, and put any who resist or use violence to death, or send them to Fort Steilacoom in irons or bound as you may deem best. This is a video of Muck Creek confluence with the Nisqually. McAllister joined the Rangers, who promptly commenced the first military act of the war. The militia charged out to Chief Leshai's home at Muck Creek to arrest Leshai and his brother Queemuth. The brothers were already gone. Next slide. And this is the Connell's monument. McAllister and Connell continued to pursue from Muck Creek to one of our agriculturally rich prairies, and I'm going to get this pronunciation wrong, but to Daf Qualt, where Connell had been squatting on our land and destroying our wild blueberry crops. And this is Connell's prairie. It's very beautiful. Standing their ground from illegal and hostile pursuit, Tuapati, brother of Coquilton and Hinook, took out McAllister and Connell on October 27th, 1855. I'll pass that to Tyson.
Thank you. Triple myth number 4. Leshai killed innocent people in the White River Massacre. And this is a story from one of my ancestors by Old Sam. Many years ago, the first white man and his wife came to the the valley below our village. My grandfather told me about it. First, the white man asked permission to stay overnight. The grandfather's people took them in, kept them and fed them. The next day and the next day, the white people stayed. They did not leave. After a time, the white man built him a house. He lived in it. He took over the land about the house and made it his own. Next slide.
So this is a map of our village Alauco and the Brannon, King, and Jones claims. Take a careful look. These are so-called claims of 3 of the families that killed our Muckleshoot people on October 28, 1855. All 3 were riparian to long stretches of the Green River, immediately downstream from our biggest tribal village, Alauco. Alauco's fish weir provided salmon for Alauco's 17 longhouses, 17. These 3 men were in a position to cork off all of our salmon runs, specifically Alauco's, but also the food supply for every one of the Green and White River villages stretching for miles upriver. Their invasion could not have posed a greater threat to our people. None of the Muckleshoot's land was ceded until 1859, so the settlers were killed that day. We killed that day. We're all illegal trespassers. But we didn't kill all the settlers, just the ones who posed the greatest threat and who treated us the worst. Both sides would have fully understood the legal doctrine of stand your ground. Our people were justifiably defending the safety of our women and the sanctity of our homes, just as whites did, just as we all do today. After the war, William Brannon's brother Joseph murdered my uncle Mowich and proceeded to go on a killing spree. He was never brought to justice despite many militia court of law. And I'll pass that to Mary.
This is my great grandfather, William Brannon, who said William Brannon settled first below the forks. He was a bad one. He whipped the Indians all the time. This is my great grandmother, Yabelza Mary Dominic. She testified when I was a girl. I was at the home of my parents on Seuss Creek. The white settlers informed my father that we must move from his home and that he must buy and pay for some piece of land somewhere else. They destroyed the building as they did the other Indian buildings. Yes, because they wanted the Indians to move away from their homes.
You're on, babe.
Tyson, Mary, Warren, and I are all proud of our ancestors who risked their own lives to repel this invasion that threatened all our Green River and White River villages. Lesai was my relative, but this was my family's score to settle with Lesai. Lesai was not involved.
Tragic myth number 5 is that Leschi killed Moses at Finnell's Swamp. Now, 3 days after the Muckleshoots dispatched, excuse me, the unwelcome neighbors at what is now Auburn, a prominent Nisqually and his brothers killed 2 militiamen in a place that became known as Finnell's Swamp. Now, the death of these militiamen were by themselves not remarkable considering that we were in the midst of full-fledged war. But Stevens employed the death of Moses as a tool for his personal vendetta against our good chiefs. Both Chief Leschi and Quameth were indicted for killing a man who had taken up arms against our people. Quameth was murdered in custody, and Chief Leschi was lynched after his second so-called trial that was based on perjured testimony. Both Leschi and Quameth did not kill Miles or Moses, but they also never betrayed those who did. Most importantly, no one was ever brought to justice for the murders of our warriors or for the murders of our women, children, and old ones.
Adjacent to Finnell's is a place called Oak, now called Kelly's Marsh. Women used to go there and dig fern roots. Thunder used to come, seize the women, and eat them. 5 brothers said, "We are going to watch for him. When he comes, we shall fight him." Those 5 brothers took bow and arrow and spear and went to that place. Thunder came. The eldest brother fought with Thunder. He fought all day. On the second day, the next brother fought. Every day, one of the brothers fought with Thunder. On the 5th, the last day, the youngest brother fought. Thunder grew tired and ill. He said, "Leave me alone and let me live. You shall be my children. You shall go into war and not be killed." Thunder went away and the people became human beings. Thunder kept its promise. The Puyallup warriors survived the war, lived to be old men, and have hundreds of descendants today. Boy, it's a
Our 6th myth is that Muckleshoot was a bit player in the war. Now, wide accounts of the war, both at the time and to the present day, demonstrate an almost complete ignorance of Muckleshoot's central role in the First Treaty War. The picture here shows the Green River Valley, which is better described as the Valley of the Warriors, the impenetrable home of our Green River warriors. Just a couple miles upriver from Sioux Village is the site of my family's Puyallup or Burns Creek village. At Burns Creek is where Chief Leschi and his people were welcomed by my ancestors to make a base camp for the 5 months duration of the war. We also believe that this is the home of the warrior Ayakama, who is the great-great-grandfather of Ramona Bennett, our woman warrior from the Second Treaty War. Displayed here is the muster roll of mercenaries, and the whites, justifiably terrified of entering our Valley of the Warriors, our Green River stronghold, hired Pat Keenum and his band of mercenaries to fight their fight for them. While we were engaged in a war for the very survival of our people, Pat Keenum's mercenaries vied with each other to be paid by the whites for our heads. On February 15th of 1856, Pat Keenum's bunch killed Diachad and his little daughter on the Green River. Wide accounts fail to mention the cowardly murder of this little child. The photograph here of Diachad's widow, Hapasiwad, tells more about the enduring grief of those events than any words can. Diachad was a Medicine Creek treaty signer and Nisqually warrior who had family on the Green. Their descendants are at the Chehalis tribe today. Sohayed, the grand uncle of Charlie Williams and Matilda Williams Barr, was the 3rd victim of the Snoqualmie mercenaries.
This is Griffin Crit. A week before Pat Keenum turned on his own people, bowed down to the soldiers and he surrendered 2 good men, Hop Towet and Skyquee, who were hung on Griffin Perry just south of what is now known as Carnation. This is a Thomas Jefferson quote. Thomas Jefferson, son of King George of the Squaxins, expressed some of my own feelings about Pat Keenum in a letter he wrote in 1917. And in reference to Pat Keenum, he fought against his own kind, fought and helped the white people, and maybe fought against his own relations. What has he got to show for it today for what he did? I don't believe he received any pensions, not even a monument at his grave. I mentioned Pat Keenum because he was my uncle by law. He married my aunt. And this is our warrior monument. All 9 Muckleshoot tribal council members come from warrior families, and most descend from several warrior lineages. I would hard pressed to find any Muckleshoots today who does not descend from one of our warriors. We were all in because we had the most to lose.
And this is the biggest myth of all. We lost the war. It's the biggest falsehood. Next slide. We went to war to get our land back. That was the whole premise of us going to war. And we were successful in achieving the return of nearly 25,000 acres of Indian land. We know of no other instance in US history where this occurred. After the war at Fox Island, Stevens capitulated to our warriors in August 1856. You shall have a large reservation at Nisqually, one large reservation on the Puyallup. Those reservations shall give you ground enough for horses, and to the horse Indians, Muckleshoot, I will give land between White and Green rivers, and I will send a man with you to mark out the ground so that you may be satisfied.
Oh, the descendants of the warriors of the first treaty war fought alongside each other. Winning the second treaty war, securing our first treaty right to fish. Wendell Lee offered this prayer at the dedication of our warrior monument. Our ancestors prayed for us. They didn't know who we would be. Yet they prayed for us. Thank you for listening. Our work follows the instructions of our chief. Whatever the future holds, do not forget who you are. Teach your children. Teach your children's children. Teach them the pride of a great people. A time will come again when they will celebrate together with joy. When that happens, my spirit will be there with you. Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much. I can imagine that was a hard thing to talk about, the loss and the losses, and I appreciate it. It was, I've already learned a tremendous amount just in this short time. And so I'd like to invite the panel to turn their cameras on, everyone to turn their cameras on. And we'll get started with some questions. We were going to talk about, the first question was going to be about the moment when tribal members felt enough was enough and they picked up weapons. But I think that presentation clearly explained that. And so I thought maybe we would just open this up for conversation about the time immediately after the signing of the treaty and the realization of the untenable situation. And if you all would like to share anything about that. Nancy, can I put you on the spot?
Thanks, Jennifer. Well, I really want to show, I really appreciate what this other group has done. It's everything we've discussed, before. I really like the fact that they're young, they've done the research, and, some young people don't like to go over this because it's hard. It's hard to, when you do the research, the massacre at Michelle, that was, Abby Wanacott did that with her students. And it was very hard because of all of what you really find out, like we said, setting the record straight. That's the big deal that we're here for, but have young people research this and find out what their ancestors went through for them to be here. That to me is the biggest message that gets across, the understanding, and that with this panel, when we first started out, that was what we were trying to achieve. So I'm glad that everybody's listening. I get good responses from it, but all the stuff that we said, it's been said before, and now there's more to it. And I hope the audience people that are out there realize there's just more to these stories than what's been written. You know, there's more research to be done. They've done a lot of it, but as you go through each tribe, you know, you see a lot of us tribal people here. There's more that each tribe has to contribute. And I hope that happens.
Thanks. Yeah. Anyone else?
Hi, Jennifer. I'd be happy to add on behalf of the Steilacoom people my respect and gratitude for Warren and his father coming and presenting information and sharing additional stories. Sometimes we don't get the additional information that others have, and especially for the Steilacoom, this was a very sad time for us because we had promises continually made to us about how land would be provided to us in our area, and the trust the Steilacoom people had was that would be a reality. We were allowed to continue living in our villages. There were 5 main villages for the Steilacoom tribe that people occupied, and for the most part, they stayed and lived and worked with those. As the stories that the team shared earlier, they really did work well with the people that they had built relations with around them. So it didn't matter. These were people that were the new people in the land, were people that they worked with and shared their lives with, and in most cases, even during that period of the war, those people were protected by the tribal people, the first people that were here, and they watched out for them along with their own people. So the lies continue to roll out. Steilacoom were not on that list of warriors, mostly because we were so close to Fort Steilacoom and the American fort, and our villages were surrounded by relationships that we'd already established. Many of our people were removed to Fox Island. And again, the satisfaction of the Treaty Council at the end, as one of our leaders stood up at that time, Sam Young, and had the support of all the other tribal leaders that were there. He was again promised land in his own area. And so the rest of that story was, yes, they made some fixes for Puyallup and Nisqually. They added the Muckleshoot reservation. They also added the Squaxin Island reservation as well, but never did they fulfill the obligation to the Steilacoom tribe. And then as time went on, and that's probably the next part of our story, right? After the war, we had other things to realize and live with that later on. But yeah, Steilacoom people were pretty much non-responsive to that. Our people did not have a tradition of fighting, and that's the truth for all the tribal people. This was something they were forced into, and not something they did because that was a way of life for them. And so it was easy for most of the people to say, I want things to work out right, and unless we're pushed, we're not going to do anything. And so it took much to get them to rise up and stand against the people.
I was interested by so many things, but one of the graphics in that presentation that showed the claims that were directly against the river and how that could potentially those people could block the salmon runs. That reminded me of how you've talked in previous panels about how that sense of place and that knowledge of place, that those people would have immediately recognized what that meant when they saw those claims. Does anybody want to talk a little bit about that sort of that immediate recognition they would have had seeing what was happening?
I think we had a situation where very different sets of eyes were looking at the same piece of ground. There were settlers coming in, seeing it for the first time. They arrived, oh, beautiful spot, looks like my dream house. Well, there's a whole other set of eyes that are looking through the eyes of thousands of years of ancestry who have been looking at that same piece of land and knowing that it held resources that were vital to their own way of life. And unfortunately, the owners of those eyes, looking at it in two entirely different ways, came together in tragedy.
Brandon, yeah.
I think Jerry hit on it right. You have these as more and more settlers are coming, and they're putting land in, and they're claiming land in areas that have been used by families for generations, for thousands of years. And word starts getting back from our leaders that were present at the treaty, that they're going to try to put us up on the hill, kind of away from the river, and most of it's going to be on a hillside, and you see our fishermen immediately start realizing, one, there's no connection to the water. Two, these are, these fishing grounds, my family's been fishing here for thousands of years. People that are living on the tide flats, I'm not gonna have access to my resources that I've been gathering for thousands of years. These are where my family's been, so everyone started realizing, hey, this is not gonna be in our favor. And so you could imagine if that was happening to you, you're going to lose access to your home. You start getting angry. You start beginning to formulate ways to keep and hold on to what you've had. These were not just this was land. But these were also sacred areas for our people. These were lands that we have ceremonies. They're lands we have our ancestors are buried in for thousands of years. We have connections personally with the land, and now it's suddenly being taken away from us. Very quickly, we used to be friendly and generous and welcoming became, hostile and defensive.
Charlene, yeah, I see you had.
Thank you, Jerry and Brendan. You're so right, because these lands that we are on right now, our people have inhabited for thousands of years. I am from the Tepixen, Squato, the Sahatomamish, the Sehawamish, and the tribes from the southern seas and marine waters. For the city of Olympia, our people were the ones of the artesian wells, people of the water. The water was very sacred to us because we recognize the importance of having water for good health. And not only was the land full of the medicines that we needed, the plants, the trees, the roots, and the water, it also had, of course, the animal nations, the deer, the elk, the birds that we would utilize in our blankets or clothing, the down of the birds. So much of that relationship, of our relationship to the land, was so important and was given to us not by word of mouth, but by ceremony, that we're going to do the ceremony, but we're going to make sure that you always remember that it's bedded deep into your heart and mind and soul, that this is the way we're going to do it. Why? Because behind it, a lot of times we forget this, was actual applied science. Our people understood the natural elements of the land, the changes of the season, and the changes of our lives. And our people had what was called the Gutsada, teachings of the body, mind, soul, spirit, infant, child, adult, elder. And it all connected back to the land. And now you have all these new people coming in, and we're looking at them and just feeling pitiful for them because they need food. They are so worn out because they struggled so hard to get across that Oregon Trail, to get to these lands that were promised by the federal government that were not yet secured from a sovereign nation, our people. And so when all these settlers come in and pioneers come in and they start settling in on those beautiful lands to fatten their cows and feed their family, and they're acting like this is my land now, but it was our sacred land. That was the land where we gathered our medicines and we had a ceremony that was there for this land. And now it's feeding cattle. So our people, of course, had the anger, but we recognize anger as a given energy from the Creator. And we use that anger in a different way. But it came time when enough was enough. Like we were supposed to answer enough is enough. And tribal people, yes, they became very angry. And some of our people, even though they were angry, still had that humanity inside them where they would go to the early pioneers and say, hey, when people are so angry, you need to get to that blockhouse. Come on, let's get you there. And with the Squaxin people, we helped people get to the blockhouse. And we noticed that some people forgot their blankets. We'd put their blankets in the canoe, take them all the way to the blockhouse to make sure that they had their blankets. But when it comes back down to the humanity, we were very angered that a sacred word was spoken at the signing of the Treaty of 1854 that said, for as long as the rivers run, grass grows, sun rises, you will be able to exist as your ancestors have in the past. However, you're going to give us all this land. The tribal people ceded land with the trust that the federal government was going to make sure we had this land. Squaxin people, we have the spoken history that the Kennedy Mud Bay all the way up to the Black Hills were supposed to be our land, but somehow by the time that treaty was ratified, went back to DC, came back, that wasn't even there. And yes, our people also went to war. Thank you.
Thank you. Warren, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, sure, Jennifer. Thank you very much. First of all, amazing job done by the youth, by the young adults. That presentation was spectacular and very powerful. And I certainly appreciate all the words and all the PowerPoint, the pictures that were shared. Amazing. It told a wonderful story, a sad story, but a true story, but also a story about perseverance and about strength and family, about how strong we can be together. My hands go up to those presenters, to the young adults. Thanking my father and Talis for putting together a wonderful, wonderful program. To the previous speakers, to the commenters, you're spot on. There were a lot of things that occurred. This was a domino effect of things that took place. And sometimes it can be a little difficult, a little challenging to understand. And so when we invite guests to come and share their version, their testimony, their history, that helps us fill in these gaps, and it helps these conversations move a little bit smoother. So I'm floored at the moment about what I've heard and what I've seen, and I just want to share those good words with our young guests. Thank you.
I feel the same way. I feel like I need some time to just think about all that was said and shared. It was just amazing. So going on to the next question, which I think comes nicely out of this discussion we're having, is that, and particularly out of that map that showed the connections around Washington that were drawn upon during the when the conflict started. Can you talk about who fought in the war, who didn't fight in the war, and how the war was fought? The idea, I think a lot of people have a pretty traditional and almost like a stereotypical view of how this kind of work is carried out. But my understanding is that it's complicated both in who and how and where it was fought. So who might like to talk about that first?
I'll start with.
I was gonna say, Brandon, you look like you have something.
I knew Nettie was going to nominate me anyway. So. She's family, so I'll let her do that. But I'll start with Puyallup. We had a lot of warriors. Like I said, the anger was strong. The anger was there. But our leader at the time, Squaxin, he was very peaceful. He had that old, he had the humanity, as Charlene was talking about. He kept that. He said, "Hey, let's be peaceful. It'll work out." But he didn't hold back. He said, "The warriors that want to fight, go defend our people. Those who don't want to stay or don't want to fight, stay here. We'll go. We'll go where we're told to go." He took a bunch of the Puyallups out to Fox Island in the internment camp out there, and still remained a leader out on Fox Island through the duration of the war. But you had like my relative Hainuk, and the other ones that were listed earlier today in the earlier presentation. They led a whole contingency of Puyallups. We had the advantage over the settlers, even who had been there for a while, because we knew the land, because we had been over, living here for thousands of years, and had crossed it, by water and by land. And so, we had the advantage of knowing where the good spots to hide were, knowing where the good spots to rest were, to get out of the rain. This is all fought throughout all seasons, and so we knew the places, and we knew where the best places were to corner people, because we'd been hunting, and then we would one of the tactics of hunting was to lead the deer into certain areas. And so this was kind of the same thing. We waited until the troops would get into the militia troops would get into the areas, and we'd attack them there. And so as far as like who fought, I don't have a whole list of names, but we know that a lot of Puyallups went. One of the battles took place there on the Puyallup River. Then we hopped up to Connell's Prairie. We were there. That's where my ancestor got his person, his people. So Puyallups are all over throughout the entire battle, from Michelle all the way around.
So I didn't know that some of the Puyallups went to Fox Island and some went to the conflict. And I'm wondering if this is a good time that we should explain what Fox Island is, what that was about. I don't know if you want to do that, Brandon, or someone else.
I can take a crack at it, and definitely feel free to anything I'm missing, fill in. So Fox Island was an island out there off out towards Purdy, and straight away from Steilacoom, the Steilacoom people. And so it was no way around it. It was an internment camp. It was where with the militias and Stevens, all those who were so-called peaceful were sent there to remain safe. But it was an internment camp. They were not given food. They were not given shelter. The area that they were in is pretty open, so it was open to the elements during the duration of the war. So a lot of people didn't survive in the internment camp either. So it was the place that everyone was supposed to go that did not want to fight. If you did not go to either Squaxin Island or Fox Island, you were considered hostile. So it didn't matter if you were there, you decided now you wanted to play neutral, then you would be considered a hostile Indian, and therefore subject to be murdered by the militia.
Charlene, did you want to add?
I do. My name is Charlene Kreis. Kreis comes from the German side of me. My great-grandfather came over the Oregon Trail before everyone started coming over in 1852, 53. So he was an early man here, a young man, and lived among the tribal people, became one of the respected non-tribal people in this area. Well, at the same time, there was this group called the West Point Military that came out, and they did this quite a bit, where they would scope out the land of the area. And so we had militia out here already. And of course, they sent the missionaries they had a formula. And so one of the areas my grandfather, he was stationed at Fort Skookum. And Fort Skookum, as a fisher person, I went there and because it's no longer there, but I stood there and I'm looking around and oh my gosh, you had the vantage point north, south. And if any tribal people tried to leave that island, they were shot. And it was an internment camp. My uncle, Jim and Randy Kreis, tell about how their grandmother said that people died so much that they couldn't bury them in the usual way of hoisting them up and putting them above the ground. That was our way of burying people. They had to dig deep trenches and place the bodies in there because people were dying so quickly because they were given blankets, and the blankets had the germs on them that caused these people to die that were there because they were considered hostile Indians. Squaxin Island was an internment camp. It's sad to say that a lot of people died there, but a lot of people too, they ran away from that island and they went to Muckleshoot, they went to Puyallup, to Nisqually, Chehalis, Skokomish, because on that island, you don't have running water. You don't have the foods that our people were accustomed to. And it was not a good place. Thank you.
Thank you. And Nettie?
Sorry, Terry. You know, I just want to say, I think the way the presentation that the other panel did was very good for people to know. The myths, you know, this was like, what were we at, 7, 8 myths? You know, there's more. And that's what I think people should focus on, because when you go back in history and read all of the stuff that was written, a lot of them are written by military, you know, they're written by governors, they're written by people in Washington, D.C. Those things that they write, you know, because you even have Indian agents that were on these internment camps that are saying, oh, everything's fine, you know, when these people were moved off of their land, they're like, oh, they moved fine, they went and got these houses, you know. Also, I'd like people to remember, the tribal people, just like we're talking about with Danny, other tribes became extinct because of what happened. If they didn't die on the internment camps from starvation, you know, due to this war, you know, there was disease. And so every time you go and read something, it's like, oh, there was only 100 tribal people there. It's like, that's not true, you know? So every time you turn around, there were myths involved, what happened to these tribal people and these tribes. There were tribes that existed. And like I said before, they were absorbed into other tribes, but their descendants are still here, you know? Why were they absorbed? Because they had no place to go. You know, there was nobody to take care of them. You know, like I said, there was disease, there was all these things happening. So one myth, you know, it's just the web you weave, you know, that's what happened with the government. It's just pile upon pile of lies, you know, that happened to the tribal people. And now, you know, the same thing when you're looking at just like the presentation, we've talked about that. You know, you got 1,280 acres, you know, for a couple of reservations, but you know, what happened? So there's myths all the way around. It wasn't that we were greedy, you know, we just wanted, we needed our land, you know, to go and gather. We needed our rivers to feed our families. You know, there was a lot of things that were taken, and that's the part of the myth that comes with this war, that comes with the treaty, you know, and the aftermath is what we're still paying for.
Thanks. Yeah. Jerry, did you want to add? Up, you're muted.
Now I'm unmuted.
There you go.
I wanted to add that the late Cecilia Carpenter wrote a very moving book called Tears of Internment about Fox Island, and also touching on Squaxin and some of the other internment islands. Fox Island went through 3 different white agents during the course of the war and the immediate aftermath. And as Brandon alludes, conditions there were pretty appalling. There were some efforts at food and housing, but they were woefully inadequate, and probably very nearly as many Native people died in the internment on Fox Island as died in combat during the war. So you had a sadness compounding on sadness during that time.
It's one of those many unfortunate things about war is that it isn't just confined to the battlefield, the ripple effect. Jerry, could I put you on the spot to explain from the military side, the difference between the militia and the regular troops and how that played into some of the things that happened?
Well, yeah, the regular army were career soldiers enlisted generally for 4 to 6 years as soldiers. They were better trained and generally more disciplined, but at the start there were nowhere near enough regular troops present on Puget Sound to handle the situation that was arising. So the immediate call went out for more militia. Some had formed already. Some had gone from Puget Sound over into the Yakima country, where the fighting had begun earlier than on Puget Sound. And some of them were returning from the Yakima country and collided with some Native forces in the area around Connell's Prairie. As the war progressed, that was one of the things that worked against the natives. They were well aware of what was happening in front of them. They were tracking troop movements very well. As we say, they were kind of ahead of the game, waiting for the troops to blunder into this or that spot. But what they couldn't see was what was happening off stage. In California, soldiers were boarding transports to come up here, and by February, another 200 regular Army soldiers had arrived. The 9th Infantry under a West Pointer named Silas Casey. So the numbers confronting the natives grew exponentially, and by that time the militia and the regular army were able to operate independently of one another. The militia tended to be less disciplined. They tended to shoot first and ask questions later. Fort Nisqually, where I have a lot of background, we lost 2 employees during the war. One of them joined the militia and was killed crossing a river. The other was a native who was peacefully cutting wood for the fort, and a group of militia passed by after the fighting had pretty much come to an end. Passed by, they marched on, and one of them decided to turn around and he shot. We know the name is Bob. That was certainly not his native name, but it's the way that he doing, and he was shot dead. And that happened a lot with, especially with the militia. They tended to just not be as well controlled as the regular soldiers generally were.
So that letter that we saw in the presentation that said pretty much gave them free rein was particularly harmful, because those are the people that would be least constrained in their response to being given that, I don't know what you call it, ability to, that authorization, I guess.
Yeah, and some of the whites took things into their own hands, even if they weren't part of the militia or the army. I think the name Brannon came up, in reprisal for his brother at White River. Brannon is generally believed to have killed at least 8 natives. And as we say, I mean, Leshai was hanged for one death at Connell's Ferry, in which he was probably not involved. Brannon got to live out the rest of his life with no reprisals, no trial for at least 8 deaths.
But Jennifer, there you go again with looking at the myth, you know, all of the settlers, all of them were, you know, told, you know, tribal people were coming to get him and all of that. And it wasn't true, you know, so as that all circulated and they talked about the newspapers, you know, wrote all of this stuff in there saying, and this happened, that happened, and it wasn't true. So, you know, there you go again with these myths that happened and stirred things up, scared people. And so how would you know a hostile tribal person from a non-hostile? How would you know that? You know, so, you know, that's a big part of that. It's like you said, you're gonna shoot first, ask questions later, and it's like you don't know if they were just walking through their traditional land and trying to get to another village to get food or whatever. You know, so how does that make them hostile?
Right. Yeah.
Jennifer, there are 2 other players in this whole event that haven't been brought up yet, and I want to bring that out just so everybody can focus on that a little bit. We had the tribes in Eastern Washington, and welcome if we have any of our Yakima relatives here tonight. But those tribes came across the mountain, and the other player that was supporting them were the British that were still angry about their loss of access to land that they had occupied with the tribes for a long time. And so the Canadian British people were providing guns to the tribes in Eastern Washington, and those tribes who were much more organized around traditional war tactics were coming across the mountain. The stories that were shared within my people was, and I don't know where this meeting took place, but I know we were at a meeting where the Yakima and others were threatening to make us slaves and take over Western Washington if we didn't support them in their war to get the Americans out of the area. So they were specifically set out to go up against the Americans and with support from the British. So that was a definite matter that people had to take into consideration as they decided which way they were going to go on this. And I think many of the tribal people believed that threat was probably bigger than any other coming from our relatives in Eastern Washington. And so we're anxious to be on the side of people they trusted more, which were their relatives from the other areas. So I think in the end, that was another myth that was broken along the way through some ingenious work from the people at Fort Steilacoom, and they made the people here believe that the tribes in Eastern Washington were actually defeated, and that had a big impact on what happened here as well. So those 2 factors were important parts about what decision people were going to make and how they move forward with things that were happening here in our own land.
That's true. There is that larger context. That's really important, that it's not just what's happening here, but there's a larger world of conflict and allyships that are going on. Yeah. Warren, I thought I saw you lean forward. Did you want to say something? No, he's good. Okay. Reading body language with my little tiles on the screen. Charlene, did you want to?
I did. I just wanted to say for Danny that there was a St. Joseph mission, and the mission, the priests in that mission supported the Yakima. And because they supported the Yakima, oh gosh, their mission was burned up. And so there were people that were non-tribal that supported tribal people. And Jerry, you mentioned something about people coming from California. There was a General John Wolfe who came up and he assumed the headquarters down in Fort Vancouver. And he was not, people did not like him because he believed that a lot of the skirmishing that was going on was the fault of the non-Indian. And that made, of course, a lot of people angry. But reality, when we really take a step back and look at it, the whole world was just in shaking for our people. Our people call it a time of splotch. The world turned upside down because not only were we having a war here in the Puget Sound area, in Seattle, there was war in Yakima, they found gold in Colville, and the Colvilles were upset. Their Fraser Canyon had gold, and their people were upset. The tribal people were upset because not only was it the taking of the land, but it was taking of the women, the rape and the murders that went on, that people just got sick and tired of it. And if you could imagine losing your loved one or something happening to your daughters or your son, you would go to battle. And that's kind of what was going on. There were so many other battles that happened during this time of this world was just in a shake of where there was wrong being done. And the earth, we believe, could feel it. And she was upset. Not that there was an earthquake, but there was a lot going on that was not right. The injustices were there. Thank you.
That's an important point, that there were non-Native people who did not agree with the war being fought. There were not very many of them, but that was definitely one component of the community. Brandon, did you just?
Yeah, I was just going to point out, you kind of look at the mentalities of both the tribes, or of all the tribes versus all the militia. I mean, you look at what Mason said, kill all Indians, hang them, put them with irons, whatever you got to do, get rid of them. But the directive from Leshai was, only fight the army, only fight the militia. And then you look at how those were carried out. That's what we did. That's we kept to Leshai's guidance. We only fought the soldiers, those who we were friendly with. We maintained those friendships with, and that was kind of reciprocated in a few cases. But then you look at what the militia and the army did at Mashell Creek. There were no soldiers, there were no warriors, or there was all soldiers. There was no warriors on the tribal side. They were all gone. This was so we got to look at also the horror that we faced, just trying to live our lives normally in our own area, away from anybody. We were hunted, as we saw at Mashell Creek, where elders, women, and children, and a handful of warriors were there but there was no protection. And just like you see in the Midwest with the Custer, these soldiers came through at Mashell Creek and murdered men, women, women, children, and elders using, you had one account of a soldier bragging and they're using children as target practice, and so think of that, but that perspective versus what we were doing. We were defending, we were trying to fight, but only fighting the soldiers. So you can kind of see the mentality of what was going on during this time too.
I think a lot of people think of genocides and crimes against humanity and think it's an other place problem, but we have that history here too. And how horrible.
I'd like to say too, Jennifer, is as you're sitting here on this for the audience, as we're sitting here as all these panelists, the tribal people, what Hoagie and Talis can point out to you is we're all related. So think back then, with Leshai and all these other leaders, everybody was related. You had the intermarriages because, that's the way it was. So, when they say the saying, blood is thicker than water, yeah, you're going to defend your relations no matter where they are, over the mountains, across the waters. So that was a different mentality. Like I said, when Leshai spoke or any other tribal leader spoke, that's what you did, because even today you have that, all the youth are taught, you respect your elders, so there was always that respect. But no matter where you went, you can look at what they pointed out, everybody was related somewhere down the line to somebody else, you know, whether it's through marriage or however. So that was a big impact with why the tribes, you know, came together, stayed together, you know, had each other's back. It was a different mentality than you get in military, I guess, at West Point, which, you know, Stevens came from.
Right. I think that's really true. Yeah. So it's already 7:19. So let me go on to the third question, which is, how did it end? What was the difference? What was different in the immediate afterwards? And what will in the next panel, we'll talk about sort of the long-term differences, but can we talk about here, what was different when the war was over?
One thing that was different from quite a few wars of the past is that in most cases, in the eastern part of the United States, the tribes lost a war. Generally, they were banished to a place hundreds or sometimes over 1,000 miles from their homeland. With this one, the native people stayed basically where they were. As we've said before, it wasn't a case of land being given to them. It was a case of finally agreeing. Finally, there being some agreement on what land won't be taken away, which is and at least not putting sugar coating on what was a very unequal settlement, but at least what came out of the aftermath was a better offer than what caused the war in the first place.
I think though that raises that question about that how to look at the end of the war. And I'll look at the panelists to kind of answer. There was, as far as I understand, never the expectation that everything would go back to pre-contact, that there was never the expectation that all the non-natives would leave. And so and that was in the presentation of that it was actually a winning of the war, much like with the war, the Second Treaty War in the mid-century, is that by achieving the reservations, it was a win.
Yeah, I would definitely not characterize us as losing the war at all. I think this is an example. I don't know very many examples, and this is Hoagie has given a presentation in the past, and it's all about how we did win the war, and this was one of the wars where we fought, or tribe people fought, and Hoagie, please hop on and paraphrase it better than I can, but these are your words, but he said, this is one of those times where Indians went to war and got land back, and so how do we, that's a win. So I think, you look at what happened with, immediately right after the war, we had kind of like our own Trail of Tears. All those, you look at the battle, the final battle on Collins Prairie was a full day or two, full large battle with many losses on both sides. How I view it, in my opinion, this is where Stevens starts recognizing that he may not be able to pull out of this, and so he says, let's go to Fox Island and look at new things and look at giving them what they want. That's a win. That's a win in our eyes. Unfortunately, it did come at a cost, and our warriors did have to head on the other side of the mountains in the middle of winter, where many people passed away on that treacherous trek across to Yakima. But yeah, I mean so immediately right after the war, we were able to get more land out of it. You had Fox Island Council that took place, because again, Stevens realized that he was in a losing situation, that he wasn't going to get any more money, any more soldiers sent his way from the U.S. government. Minnie Penny had kind of chastised him for costing so much money in the first place. Should have been simple. You know, it was really belittling Stevens. So he wanted an end to this too, and you know, and so he started to talk with the leaders over at Fox Island, who were able to get the boundaries widened for Muckleshoot, or established for Muckleshoot, widened for Puyallup. And, you know, and so after the war, I'd say we won, but by all means, let's let the panelists fill that in.
Well, you can't say it was a military victory. It wasn't won on the battlefield, but it was a moral victory to the extent that the reasons for the fighting were recognized at last.
I feel it's one of those, we won the war, but we lost the battle. I don't know where that's coming from.
I can't tell either. Can you see? Let me mute me.
Jerry, it's Jerry. Jerry. But you know, I believe it, you know,
It is
I have to
Jerry.
mute again.
No, go ahead. I unmute myself.
Oh, can you mute though for just a minute and then we'll go back. There
So
we go.
I think it's, you know, we won the war, but we lost the battle, because we're still battling today. You know, we're still up against a lot that people don't understand, you know, and I guess it's hard for them to understand. So like Danny's saying, you know, the land, you know, our culture, our traditions, you know, everything is always a battle. I know people use the word, you know, the tribe has thrived. I don't believe that, because a lot of our tribes are still struggling. You know, we're struggling with addiction, which wasn't a thing before, you know, the explorers came in, the settlers happened, the military. So there, you know, we're still battling with diseases. So there's a lot of things that I think we're still battling with. I don't think it came to an end, you know. It's just we've kind of caught up with the times and been able to fight back. You know, there was a time when we didn't have biologists. We do. You know, there was a time we didn't have doctors. We didn't have all these people. Now we do, but you're still battling because, like I said, I don't believe in decolonization, because we didn't colonize, and we'll never, ever go back to the way we were. You know, we'll never get the land we had. We've lost a lot of people. So, you know, I believe, you know, my opinion is tribes are still battling. You know, we're getting up there, but it's still a big battle for a lot of us. You get some of these tribes that, and I'm going to use Puyallup, who at one time, you know, there was vast land. Now you're kind of plunked in the middle of Tacoma, you know, which is suburban. So you have a lot of tribes that are like that. You know, you're right in the middle of this, and it's like you're trying to expand, you're trying to get your traditions, your cultures back. You know, it's hard to find places for your native foods. You know, so there's a lot of things that have happened to tribes that they weren't used to. So it continues, you know, it goes on, but we're adjusting, I guess you'd say.
Right, that upheaval that Charlene was talking about doesn't stop at the end of the war. Yeah. And Danny, I think that we'll talk about this at the next panel, but there's also just that incredibly complicated story that evolves of who did get a reservation, who got recognized, and all that, that is, there is no good answer to that situation. And so but we'll definitely be talking about that in the longer term impacts, I think. Yeah.
I just want to say this in front of everybody, though. I need to see Charlene in person and put my arms around her, because I recognize as of tonight, she's the first person I have ever met that has recognized her ancestry from Teepeakson as one of the tribes who signed the Medicine Creek Treaty. And I know that several in Charlene's area became a part of the Squaxin Island tribe. That's what became the Squaxin Island tribe in that reservation. But to know you, Charlene, now, you have a special place in my heart, just because one of the things that I have come to realize, and it really is reflected in what Netzi just said, is that there are probably some blessings that the Steilacoom received because we didn't have to survive on a reservation. Continuing to live in our villages and eventual loss of those lands is devastating, of course, and never meeting the promise that was given in the treaty. But there are some things that were negative things that the people that ended up on the reservation had to live with, and so that's all part of our history and part of who makes us who we are and where we are today. Our loss of our language is an important thing. I saw that question come up earlier, and so another thing that I want the audience to recognize is that all these people here had their own languages. So yes, we do use Lushootseed now as that's the form of the language that most of us are able to recreate at this point. But the original Tepeakson language, the Steilacoom language, the hundreds of Puget Sound Salish languages that existed with the people that were here don't exist any longer. The Steilacoom language, we have very small pieces of it, the unique parts that make it Steilacoom. And so, yeah, the language pieces, very important part of what happened with the history. Fox Island, and last thing I'll say, and then I'll try to be more quiet. Some of the Steilacoom people tried to stay at Fox Island and grow the potatoes that they had planted there. They learned about potatoes and discovered that, hey, maybe that's even a good substitute for our camas that we've been gathering and didn't have. And so they had to fight us off Fox Island after they closed that down because they wanted to stay and harvest their potatoes.
So Elizabeth has told me we can go on for about 10 minutes, but I wanted, Warren, I think you wanted to say something to this last question before we go to questions from the audience, or did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, has everybody had their opportunity?
Yeah, I think you're next.
So Jerry, mute?
Yeah, Jerry, can you mute?
No, I'm not mute.
Oh, but can you mute? Because it's making a buzz sound.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Getting a feedback from you, Jerry. If you could mute, that would be
There we
great.
go.
Be thankful. Thank you, Jerry. So Jennifer, your question, back to your original question about post-war. So just some thoughts, running through my head, and I want to share those with the audience and with my fellow panelists. The fight didn't stop there, Jennifer. The fight continued. The fight to even though we relocated to these reservations, to these federal government villages, federal government sanctioned villages, everything that you see the tribes have today, it wasn't handed to these people. It wasn't handed to our ancestors post-war. They literally had to give their blood, sweat, and tears to get it, and even to get a decent meal was basically against the law for them to leave these reservation boundaries, to go feed their children, to feed their elders, to feed their parents, their grandchildren. It was illegal for them to go harvest that deer, to go harvest that salmon, dig that root, pick that berry. It didn't stop with that war. I want people to know that. I mean, there were some good things that came out of the war. New reservations, new villages, so people could create continue their trail, their Atzef Taubil Shauk, their Indian trail. That needs to continue. Continuity. Even though it happens now in this modern world with tracking devices and with phones and with vehicles and with detailed maps that show us where our reservation is and where it isn't, where our UNA ends and where it starts, etc. The war continues, Jennifer, every single day. There isn't one thing that we enjoy, the privileges that we have as being Atzestalbilch. It's not a privilege. It's a birthright. These people that sacrificed their lives, that identified their families and extended families to come together. I need your help. I need your help now. Come and join me. Our livelihoods are being threatened. People are telling me where I can't eat. People are telling me where I can't travel. Well, it never stopped, Jennifer. It comes at us in different forms now. But even though that version of that battle has ended, the fight continues. We as Native people continue this every single day about our identity. Most of us, that's just all we want, because that identity has been ripped away, stripped away by efforts that was done on purpose. That was the agenda. That was the intent, to strip them down to nothing. Well, it didn't work. And it will not work as long as young adults, like you saw at the beginning of this program, as long as we have those young adults and our children who take an interest in the value of their identity, the value of their teachings, the value of their bloodline. I feel better now. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren. Yeah, that's such an important point, is that it just continued in different forms, and that, you know, generations of people have carried that fight forward. So yeah, Charlene.
I just want to say thank you, Warren, for saying that. In my past life, I was a fisher person, and I'm standing on the bow of my boat, and I'm looking out at the waters, looking for salmon. And I'm not even looking at the land, I'm just looking at the waters. And from above is this like a just constant, oh, it's like daggers running into me. And I don't cuss much, but I turned and I pointed to that person and said, "You can go to hell." And the reason I said this is because this was the year I lost my dad. And this guy says all these cuss words at me, and it's just going at me constantly. And I let him go roll off my back. But what he said was not good. He said, "The only good Indian is a dead Indian." And that's what got me unraveled. Well, my husband at that time, he was so shocked that I would even say that. And I'm looking at him, my husband, and I said, "Take me to shore now, because I'm just a woman." But I was ready to fight and defend that. No, we can't go that way. The only good Indian is a dead Indian. Well, at that time, I wanted to go to shore because really I was so angered. But reality is I can't fight. But I did want to say, ladies, that during this time of war, it was documented women did fight. They were warriors. They were in the battle side by side with their men, and they were ready to fight till give their life. And when that happened, it was during the 1980s. And you would think at that time, we would have come to a better understanding that we can be more understanding of different nationalities. About 1990, I'm walking into a store and someone says, "Go back to Mexico." And they're saying that to me. And I turn and I look at them, and believe me, this is what I wanted to say. why don't you go get back on your Nina, your Pinta, your Santa Maria? I think that's the 3 ships. But then I just kept my mouth shut because 2 wrongs don't make a right. And I don't want to do wrong. I want to be able to exemplify that I, as a tribal person, I can hold myself upright and I can walk a good life, a life that is going to teach others that we can get along no matter what nationality we are. And as the people were talking, Warren, you were saying, the battle isn't done. It's not finished. We're still battling over the water rights, of making sure that there's water that goes into those streams so we can have the salmon. We're talking about the climate control because we are so worried. What are we doing to our world, to our land? The battle is not done because we are at the table when there's discussions about environmental concerns. We are there as tribal people. The battle is not finished because we still believe the land that we walk on, this air that we breathe has a sacredness to it for the next generations. Our people had longevity of life. We lived beyond 100 years old. Nowadays, they pay billions of dollars to try to find out, how do you do that? Not that we do it now, but because we had that relationship to the land, we were able to have that longevity of life. I just want to say we have many battles ahead, not of bloodshed, but battles where we really have to work it out together to make sure that the next generation has this ability to love this land. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlene. I'm sorry you suffered those indignities. That was not okay. We're going to try and get to a few questions if everyone on the panel is okay with going a little bit longer. And then I'll just remind the audience that we'll record this if you're not able to stay, so you can come back. Does that work for the panel to go just, there's 2 or 3 questions that it would be great if we could get to. Great. Okay, thank you. So one question from Kurt is, will the different tribal members collaborate on combining and writing up their historical research on the first treaty war to bring their point of view to a wider audience? And I think that has been discussed in different forums. I'm not sure, Netzi, maybe, I think you've talked about some of the possible things that might come out of these panels. Do you want to address that? The podcast maybe, or the curriculum, or?
I'm more for the curriculum. I'm really adamant about getting this story, all of this information to the schools in order to get it circulated, to everybody that needs to. I do get a lot of requests from teachers, so they are listening, they're hearing, and wanting to get the correct histories, the correct stories. So I'm glad this panel's here because now they have some kind of a contact, a reference contact for people to get a hold of. I think Warren addressed the podcast because I am not doing a podcast. I draw the line there. So Warren can address that.
Warren, are you interested in doing the podcast?
Oh my gosh, yes. I love podcasts. They're it's a great form of relaxation for me, and I can relate to it. It's easy to listen to. It's easy to put on virtually every phone or iPad. It can, it's an easy access.
Has a wonderful reach. Yeah.
Right, and so I think that would be it'd be an opportunity. You can listen to it on your own time, in your own place or in your own space. So and you can do it in bits and pieces. 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Yeah, I think I think that'd be a wonderful option if that's something the panelists would be interested in doing. Maybe something very familiar to what we saw at the beginning of this this program. Something very familiar or something very similar to that.
Mm-hmm. I think that there's a bunch of ways that could be approached.
But in our own voices, again, like the young folks did, but in our own voices as researchers and historians. Yeah,
that would be amazing. So Doug Sackman asks, well, he says, thank you all for this excellent panel and for sharing your knowledge. The first presentation made clear that Leschi was convicted of murder in a travesty of justice. In 2004, a historical court of inquiry and justice was convened in Tacoma. Testimony was given and Leschi was exonerated by this court. What are your reactions to this small symbolic gesture toward justice? And what more do you think non-natives should do to acknowledge the injustices of the first treaty war? What reparations are needed? That's a big question. But would somebody like to address, maybe we could just focus on the what you thought of that action in 2004?
I think it was symbolic, and I think every tribe should do the same. You know, there needs to be that publicity of what happened, you know, during the war. I mean, you know, because we even like what Warren's talking about, the battle, and Charlene talked, you know, the battle still continued. That, you know, there was the fish wars, you know. I mean, these people are dragged up the beach, their club, they're, you know, so there's still these battles going on. But with that, each tribe has these individuals, you know, that these things have happened to. And I think that needs to be put out there, you know, these, and like I said, a part of what people don't understand is we didn't write our history, you know, it was oral history. You know, I finally got it after a while when I'd hear these stories over and over and over by our elders. I'm like, okay, oral history, that's what it's about. You know, so you can repeat, you know, like, here comes the story again, but that wasn't written. So all the things that have been there have always been written by, you know, non-tribal people. And that's where I think these, like an exoneration or just something like that, you know, ceremonial that happens to get all of that out there, to let people know there was more. I mean, to see the tragedies of some of these leaders that did go into war, you know, it's really sad, but I do tell a lot of young people, you have to get past that. If you don't read it, if you don't acknowledge it, you just think all of these things that happened was put in your lap, and it wasn't. You know, these ancestors gave their lives, they sacrificed, you know, the men, the women, and even the children. The trauma is still there, you know, and so in order to get over it, you really have to see what happened. And like the old saying, you need to know where you came from. You know, so there's a lot of leaders that did that. And it's like, I think the young people need to understand that they did, you know, they fought, they gave their lives, and understanding that would maybe help them to think, oh, my life isn't so bad, you know, compared to what they had to go through.
Right.
Some people may be surprised to hear that almost every year there's somebody in Congress that tries to propose an abrogation or a discontinuation of the treaties. Can you believe that? And it's like, when have we ever said, all right, we're going to sign this treaty that's supposed to last forever, doesn't matter which sovereign nation that's with, and then say we're going to throw those out, discontinue them, they're not valid any longer. That happens. I'm sorry, I'm going to share another story here, but I'll try to make it quick. The day I met Hillary Clinton at the White House, and I didn't know who she was at the time, and it was kind of one of these parking lot situations where I ran into her as we left from one part of the White House to the other. But there was a president, Bill Clinton, who said, you know what, I want to do something about the wrongs that were done to the Native people. So reparations really can take place at some point. And so he invited all the people back to Washington, D.C., including my tribe. And as we sat there and talked, we thought that progress would be made. And he tried to do some things before he left office. But later on, I don't know if I would still recommend people vote for Hillary Clinton. However, I voted for her, and I wanted to see her as president because that day I met her in the parking lot and she was interested. She wanted to know the story and she wanted to know something about it, even before I knew who she was. And I thought, you know what, this is somebody that could make a difference. And there are people like that. And we've seen many presidents come and go. I've got my favorites and I've got my unfavorites as well, and we'll see what happens as we move forward. Reparations are necessary. I think that our people do have a nation-to-nation relationship that is much more respected today than it ever was in the past. So I think that we have made progress.
think so too. Okay, well, it's 7:50. Unless somebody has a very specific thing, I'd like to thank you very much, and to everyone, the people who did the presentation before the program or before the discussion, and then for this discussion. I appreciate all of you sharing your knowledge and ideas. And I will pass it back to Elizabeth to sign us off.
Yeah, thank you all. Once again, just an incredible conversation, and really appreciative of all the work you've put into this program. And you can tell from the chats what it means to people to have you all here tonight. So thank you very much. Thank you to our audience for participating and keeping it lively. And again, a thank you to Justice Mary, Tyson, Wayne, and Hoagie for contributing to tonight's panel. We will send out some further resources and some links we encourage our audience to use to continue their own research after tonight's program, as well as a survey. And again, our panel does look at all of our survey responses when we meet to discuss how to improve this program and to continue it forward. And as we had heard tonight, there's a sad story here. There's a true story and a story of perseverance, and one of the strength of community. The fight continues, and this is all just a lovely effort towards that. So again, thank you for being with us, and thank you for sharing. We will see you all soon.